Hi there, everybody. My name is Marcus Koppenhoefer. Thank you for coming out. Um, Today I'm going to be going over animation sound design. So I wanted to start off by telling you kind of how this all started. It all started when I started watching anime during my time here at Ball State, and continuously watching and watching, I started paying more attention to the sounds that were going on, and I was kind of just realizing there's a group of people doing this, and that's a potential job for me. I mean, this is something I love to do and watch, so maybe I could get in on it. So I decided to reach out to the director of animation here at Ball State, and he got me in touch with two undergrad students. One is Kimberly Holbrook, who made the film Prosthetica, and then there is Nikki Dixon, who did the film Nothing Personal. So I'd like to start off by going into those films, finished product. So we're going to go back here and show the presentation. And well, before I do that, I'd actually like to mention how this whole coronavirus affected my, workflow and everything. Um, so before I had the glorious studios here at Ball State, and I had all these fancy plugins and stuff, that and eventually they closed down the studios due to the virus, so I had to kind of shift my workspace. So I had to set up my monitors and get like kind of a dual screen thing going because my tower computer couldn't handle the processing of Pro Tools, so I pulled out my laptop, which is just a processing beast. Um, and so I got that set up. You can see I have my books just kind of being my speaker mounts, and I have my Focusrite 18i8 there on the side, and then I have a Shure SM57, which I use for some recording. And when I first started this transition, it didn't all just kind of happen right away. I had to, kind of make some calls to Avid and get my video engine fixed because it just wasn't working right. Um, and then while I was working, I also, was looking for sound effects to throw into my films. And at first, I was using freesound.org, which anyone who's ever used that might know that it's just not the best for, you know, high quality sound effects. Some of them I had to, edit as I went along, but I got tired of trying to look for stuff on Freesound, so I got in contact with Jeff Seitz at Ball State here, and he got me the MMP database of sound effects, and that helped me a big bunch. You can see that on the left is kind of all the folders and stuff. There's a bunch of files for sound clips in there, and then when I was, in contact with Avid, I renewed my perpetual license plan, which cost like $100. It was great. But when I did that, they actually gave me a couple free things, and one of those was just a sound effects database, which you can see here on the right of the screen. It has quite a few in there, and then I was still using other websites such as soundsnap.com. That one kind of took me a long way. Had to pay for some of the sound effects though, which kind of hurt the bank a little bit. But we have to make do with what we got. So at some point, I, found that there were some really tricky sound effects that I just couldn't get online. So what I did is I used my ingenuity and started recording stuff around my house here using this SM57 and my Focusrite system here. And I was able to get a lot of, different sounds that I wouldn't have been able to find on the internet. And overall, it really helped out a bunch to have that here at the house because I wasn't able to do that as easily in the studios, just because I didn't have as many like weird things. Like I had to snap a plank of wood at one point, and that's just not something I would have been able to easily do within the studios at Ball State. So, coming back home for this coronavirus thing kind of helped me get some of those more obscure and abstract sounds for my films. Um, so I would then like to start off by showing you guys the first film that I started working on when before I did any of this stuff, I had no experience at all doing any sound designing. So this whole process has been a learning experience for me and just me just kind of trying it out all by myself with no guidance here. So the first film is directed by Kimberly Holbrook and it's called Prosthetica and it's a horror film and I hope you enjoy.
You must be Lauren.
Hey there.
for responding to my ad. We could really use some help around here. This is your register. You won't have to use it much.
It doesn't get busy around here?
Not lately. Should soon. So that's my store. Just a few aisles and a bathroom.
This will be easy to navigate.
All right, that was the film. Um, so when I first got this session, all I had was the recorded voices. Um, and so that means I had to line up all of the voices to the film myself. Uh, Kimberly sent me like her base file for the video, which already had like those voices lined up. So I pretty much just lined up everything that I had to what she already had. But there were a couple things I thought could have been just slightly tweaked, and so I did that. I had to sort through a bunch of screaming. There was so much screaming. It was just a headache at first. I powered through it. I don't think I've ever listened to so much screaming in my life, but eventually we got it all lined up. I was thankful. I put that stuff on mute for a while until it was time to come back to it. And then after I got the voices lined up, I started working on some of like the simpler sounds in the film, which for me were like stuff I could easily find on like freesound.org, which was things like the phone texting and like messages through that. I found some like door creaks and stuff, but eventually I ended up replacing those because they just weren't as great as the ones I got later in the film. And I also started doing some simple like ambiance stuff to like kind of fill up the space of the film in the beginning to kind of get more of a picture of the atmosphere, such as the AC and the buzzing lights in the store that you can see right here. Um, and I'll just play a little bit of that just isolated for you guys really quick. Nothing too complex going on. I used what's called the Haas effect and I duplicated these tracks and hand them hard left and right, and then I time adjusted one of them and delayed it by 480 samples because my session is in 48K. So I then created the Haas effect using those settings. You can kind of see on the right side of the panel here is kind of how everything's panned out, and then I have that time adjuster, which is what I use to delay the tracks. So I did that to kind of create more of a stereo setting because these tracks were originally just mono sources. So I turned it into stereo to make it more of an ambient atmosphere for the film. Um, After that, I started doing a bunch of stuff like recording my own sounds here. And one of those would be this metal door squeak that like I could not find for the life of me online anywhere. And you just can hear this really quick by itself. That's my front door to my house. Lovely sound. Worked out really well. I also used the front door to my house for the bangings on the door. I just was ripping at the door handle, driving my dogs insane here at home. Um, I also found stuff like this drawer sound in the database, and I had to convert the file actually because Pro Tools was not having it in the file type it was when I was using it from the MMP database. So I had to convert it and then I had to throw it in. I had a couple other drawer sounds before. Like I said, I kind of went back and replaced some of my sounds I had earlier on. And the drawer, ended up being this. I tinkered with it for a while. Just a little, well, it was great. So after that, I kind of found a bunch of sounds that were great, but they weren't perfect. So what I had to do a bunch of was EQing it to shift it to fit the film perfectly. So in this first one here is the key catch that I used. You can see I just put a high pass filter on that and kind of drove out a bunch of the low end because I'll play the film version first, which sounds like this, and then without the EQ, it sounds like this. There's a big kind of low end smack going on in there, and I had to get rid of that because that just wasn't going to fit the film. So I had to use a bunch of EQ to help kind of fit the sound to the film. That's what I actually used mostly throughout this whole session was EQ to do kind of that stuff. Another example was kind of like not using a low or a high pass filter, but just kind of using some peak reduction here at on the water in the sink that I had there. The original sounded no, I had the EQ'd version, which sounds like this, and then I have the bypass on the EQ, removing it, which sounds like this. Very subtle difference. It's not like gonna make or break the film, but I felt like, just throwing on that kind of small amount of EQ helped make it sound more like a sync. Just it was, I believe it was like some sort of like little fountain before, and I turned it into that kind of smaller sync setting. So I did that a lot on a lot of the sounds I had for the film. Um, I used a compressor eventually for a lot of the screaming, which you can see on the left is my compressor settings. I tried to, make it not too intense, but like I wanted them to stay kind of loud at the same time, because it's a bunch of screaming, that's gonna be loud. So I tried to maintain the integrity of the screen, but also make it so it's not blaring and causing peaks on the master fader. And then there was stuff like the bone break, just kind of that clicking sound. The file itself would cause a peak on the master, so I put a limiter on it, and there's also a limiter on my master fader as well to help kind of fight that. I wanted to keep the integrity of the sound as well without, pressing the hell out of it and all that. I liked the sound I had, and I didn't want to change it, but it was causing a peak, so I put a limiter on it. So, and that's the bone break there. Want to hear it again? I just love that sound, don't you? So, what I did next is, well, not next. I just kind of, with this film, I did a lot of jumping around. So, I mentioned in the beginning, I started with some of the simpler stuff, and then I was just kind of like jumping around trying to find stuff that wasn't going to be too hard to throw in the film, and I was kind of saving the harder stuff for the end. So at one point, I just started putting in footsteps like for a whole like day or two, and as you can see, all of those steps are individually placed. I took a footstep track from the MMP database and I clipped them all separately and I placed them all individually to match up. I was lining that up. And of course, when I'm doing all this, I have to put a fade in and a fade out on the beginning and end of the clip so you don't hear any popping noise potentially. So a lot of work went into just doing footsteps. Um, and I don't know if you guys remember during the bathroom scene, there was a bunch of light flickering. I did the same thing with the light flickers. I placed each individual flicker with the film, and to say the least, there's a lot of flickering lights going on. So I also put in volume automation for some of the parts in the film where people are, getting closer or farther away from the perspective of the screen, and so you can see kind of here on the left on the left, you can see the names of the track. I have one that's called Willow Store Steps, even though the character's name is Lauren. I changed it eventually. But you can see there's some lines going on there and some points. That's some volume automation I did to create some of that effect. You can see there's a slope at that point. There's Lauren's just walking away from the screen at that point. I'll play a little bit of that just so you guys can get a hear for that by itself. Play it one more time. Nothing too complex going on there, but it really helps kind of bring you into that environment that's going on. So eventually I got to a point where I was ready for the music. And so Kimberly sent me all the music files and just gave me timestamps. And what I did with those is I put them in the rough spots that she gave me, and then I adjusted it slightly for a better flow with a fade in and fade out. Tried to make that sound the best. At one point, I was doing environmental sounds, and at the end, you might have heard there's like, a small thing like a barking dog, which doesn't complete the film, but I feel like it's just part of the scene that I enjoyed putting in there, even though it's inconsequential ultimately. But I had to convert this file, and then I put tape echo on it to give it more of like a reflective outside dog barking sound that you'd hear in the middle of the night. And I'll just play that by itself. And I intentionally placed the dog barking after what would be the final screams of Lauren as she's getting dragged into the she's getting dragged back into the bathroom. And I don't know, it's just small things like that that I tried to make happen to really create an environment. Um, and I also like put reverb on the sounds that were going on in the bathroom. Now, in hindsight, I could have just made a bus and put reverb on it, but I put individual reverb tracks on all the sounds that were going on during that time in the film when we were in the bathroom to try and give it kind of a reflective, echoey kind of bathroom sound. Um, so after I kind of got all my sound effects in the piece, I started doing a bunch of panning automation, and I'll play a little example here, I guess, of this. If you have two speakers going on in front of you, you should be able to hear some voices moving around in your speaker pan here. And in some of those, there's some frames in there which the perspective of the sound that you're seeing, that you'd be seeing and hearing, changes. So I had to try and change the perspective of what you're seeing and hearing, but also making it not so abrupt to where it's like, oh my gosh, that just changed so abrupt. Um, so in this screen, she does not move all the way across the field. She just moves slightly. So this panning wasn't like too extensive here. I didn't get too extensive on left to right panning in this, other than just kind of like starting off left and right. There wasn't too much automation to be done, but there was a couple of the times where the perspective changed. Notably, the mannequin kind of hangs out a little bit in the center on this example, and then kind of goes far over to the left at one point. I can play it again one more time. And when Willow, or not Willow, when Lauren is hanging or in the bathroom, she's panned more to the right, and then I had to bring her back to the center for when that final screaming out the window scene kind of happened there. So after I finished panning everything, I started doing volume automation as well, just kind of adjusting overall levels and everything. And once I finished doing that, I sent in the draft to Kimberly, and she had a few notes to make some changes. It was like just four additional sound inclusions, and so I did that, and it was sent in, and then it was approved by Kimberly, and this became the final product. And that's kind of how I worked on Prosthetica. It was a really long, hard journey to get through this one because there's a lot of action, and it was like the first one I ever started on, so it was all a big learning curve going in. Um, it was really fun, and I appreciate Kimberly giving me the chance to work on this when I had no prior experience. So the next film I worked on was Nothing Personal, and this one was directed by Nikki Dixon. And I guess I'll just start off by showing you guys the film.
Hello? Yeah, talking to her. Mm-hmm. Yeah, all right. I'm on my way. Time to go.
All right, so that's the film for that one. You may notice that I would have let the credits roll had there been some music, but you may notice how there wasn't any music at all. So, Miles Jenna was originally working on this, and he was the one who did the recordings, I believe, for the voices and lined those up. So when I got this, I didn't have to line up voices. But I also was waiting on music though this whole time, and just got it today at 6 a.m. I was supposed to get it at the beginning of this week, but getting it this morning, I didn't want to include it into the final product because then I didn't want to rush it. So, um, Nikki has to have this done by next week, and so I'm going to have the music included by then, and I'm going to update it eventually. So when I started on this project, I had a different approach on this one because I'd already worked on Prosthetica a bit at this point, and I started this one, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this differently. I'm gonna go from start to finish sounds. So I was doing sound effects from the beginning and going on like through the film, and eventually I started to deviate from this because eventually I came across some challenging sound effects to get in there, and I was like, I'll come back to that one later, and so I did it that way. So when I was working on this as well, there was a lot of sound effects, such as the wing flaps, that I got to reuse a bunch of sound clips that I found for those little the letter flaps. I used the same sound as I did for Rudo, the guy with the swords, when he was flapping his wings. I just used different EQ on them to make them sound different. So I'm gonna first play for you what Rudo's wing flaps sound like. And you can even hear a little panning automation in there. That's from the very beginning when he flies off screen. Um, and then on the right side is the small envelope wing flaps. So I used a bunch of EQ to kind of reshape some of the sounds I was already using to help save myself time looking for other sounds. If one works, then one works. So another sound effect I used was the glowing sound on the string when it first shows up between the two, and I found a great sound, but like by itself it wasn't gonna cut it. So I had to use a lot of EQ to make that sound fit to the film, like I had with kind of some of the other sounds I used in Prosthetica, how I used EQ to fit the sound to the film. So you'll hear what I used the EQ on for the glowing string here. Just that sound, and then without EQ, it sounds like this. A lot more low end and stuff going on in the higher end of the spectrum. That just to me, it didn't seem like it was going to fit the film well, so I went with the EQ'd version to make it fit. Um, and so there's eventually, the big moment at the end of the film where the string gets cut and they're done for. They're donezo. So what I did is I wanted to really amp up that part of the film, and so what I did is I faded out everything that was going on. I turned it completely silent, and I just made it the big slice, and I put some reverb on that to juicy it up, put some sauce on it to really make it more notable. Um, and I used a lot of once again fade in and fade out stuff going on because I went through on both films and checked every clip and made sure there was a fade in and fade out on every single sound I put on in the film. Um, but this is actually the only time I used reverb in this film, and I thought it helped make an impactful uh, sound for when the string gets cut. Um, and there it is by itself. And so after that, I was doing some ambient stuff, and I don't know if you guys remember when we first got to the park scene, there was a leaf that went across the screen, and there was a bunch of times where I took some sounds that I placed sounds in the film that were happening off screen, and like so when you first see Rudo flying as the guy's walking away from the apartment after he kisses her goodbye, he's walking off, but Rudo's just kind of flapping his wings over there, and before he's even on screen, I already made it so you could hear him flapping, and so there's a bunch of stuff I did like that. With the leaf, I did the same. Before the leaf is even on screen, the leaf sound comes into play. And what I did with this, I panned it, going from left to right completely. So if you're listening on some speakers, I'm gonna play this example for you, and you're gonna hear the leaf go across the screen like it did in the film. So it's just kind of small little things like that that I did to help create the field. Um, so after I once again did all the panning, I started doing more volume automation and all that. Not too much to do, just kind of more adjusting levels. Um, After I did that, I sent in the draft, and then I was waiting for word from Nikki, and she responded and was like, "Wow, you did an amazing job. That's cool. Now we just got to get the music in that." So right now we're just kind of waiting to get the music set to this once I have a chance to do that, and that's kind of how I approached this film and got it done. If you guys want to see Nothing Personal again, I'm gonna have it posted on this Google Drive link that I'm gonna post in the chat. And I would love to share Prosthetica, but right now Kimberly's going to submit it to the film festival, so I can't put the full version of the film anywhere yet until it's okay to do so. So eventually I will have that available, but for now I'm going to post a link to the Google Drive, and I guess I'd like to take this time now